first time you saw it, you probably laughed. A battered Winnebago drifting through outer space like it took a wrong turn on a family road trip. No sleek metal, no futuristic design, just wood panels, mismatched buttons, and pure absurdity floating among the stars. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That ridiculous spaceship wasn't just a joke on screen. It was real, built, filmed, engineered, and dragged through production with almost no digital effects to hide its flaws. Why would a Hollywood crew pour time, money, and sweat into turning a roadside RV into a flying sci-fi nightmare? And how did something so dumb end up becoming one of the most unforgettable ships in movie history? If you grew up loving movie cars and bizarre behind-the-scenes stories, this is one journey worth sticking around for. So let's follow the trail of strange decisions, happy accidents, and forgotten truths that turned the dumbest spaceship ever made into a cult legend. Number 20. It was literally a real Winnebago. The story begins with something most people still refuse to believe. The Flying Winnebago was not a mock-up. It was not a lightweight shell. It wasn't even designed to be a spaceship at all. It started life as a real, full-size Winnebago recreational vehicle, the kind you'd expect to see parked at a dusty roadside campground, not drifting through the vacuum of space. Instead of fabricating a futuristic frame from scratch, the production took an existing RV and forced it into a role it was never meant to play. That decision alone explains why everything feels slightly wrong. The proportions, the weight, the awkward bulk. The ship doesn't glide like science fiction vessels usually do. It lumbers. It feels heavy, because it was. For the crew, this meant constant compromises. The vehicle wasn't built to be lifted, rotated, or mounted on rigs. Every shot involving movement became a technical headache. But that physical reality gave the ship something rare in comedy sci-fi. It felt tangible, real, uncomfortably present on screen. And that realism became the foundation for everything that followed. Number 19. Spaceballs had almost no CGI. To understand why the Winnebago feels so physical, you have to rewind the clock. Spaceballs was made in an era where digital effects were either primitive or wildly expensive. There was no safety net of CGI to fix mistakes later. That meant nearly everything you see was achieved through practical effects. Full-size builds, mechanical rigs, forced perspective, old-school camera tricks. If it looks clunky, it's because it was clunky in real life. The Flying Winnebago had to be lit, framed, and moved like a serious science fiction ship, even though it looked like a cosmic joke. When something didn't work, they couldn't fix it in post. They rebuilt it, adjusted it, or lived with the flaw. Ironically, that limitation became the film's secret weapon. The lack of CGI gave the comedy weight, texture, imperfection. The ship wasn't funny because it was fake. It was funny because it was real and painfully out of place. And that creative constraint pushed the production toward decisions that only got stranger from here. Number 18. The spaceship was built in just weeks. The madness escalated the moment the schedule locked in. The production didn't have months to design a parody spaceship. They had weeks, barely enough time to turn a roadside RV into something that could survive lights, rigs, and repeated takes. Instead of careful refinement, the build became a controlled sprint. Crews worked fast, cutting corners not out of laziness, but out of necessity. Panels were reinforced where cameras would look. Weak points were ignored if they stayed off frame. Every decision was about speed, not perfection. This rush explains why the ship feels improvised, because it was. The Flying Winnebago wasn't engineered like a machine. It was assembled like a joke racing against the clock. And somehow, that frantic energy made it work. What could have been a disaster turned into a visual identity. The ship looked chaotic because the process behind it was chaotic, and that chaos became part of its charm. Number 17. Wood panels in outer space. One of the strangest visual details appears the moment you step inside. Wood. Not painted metal, not futuristic plastic. Actual wood paneling. The kind found in 70s RV interiors. This wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. The filmmakers leaned into the absurdity, refusing to disguise the Winnebago's origins. The joke only worked if the audience recognized it instantly. But the choice had consequences. Wood reacts to heat, lights, and movement. Under studio conditions, panels warped, loosened, and shifted. Continuity became a nightmare. The ship's interior subtly changed from scene to scene. Yet that imperfection made the comedy sharper. The contrast between outer space and outdated RV decor wasn't just funny, it was uncomfortable. And that discomfort made the ship unforgettable. Number 16. The cockpit was pure chaos. If the exterior looked wrong, the cockpit looked completely unhinged. There was no clean design language, no logical layout. Buttons were scattered with no clear purpose, switches overlapped, and panels competed for space. This wasn't sloppy production design. It was deliberate confusion. The goal wasn't realism. It was overload. The cockpit needed to feel like a machine built by accident rather than intention. For the actors, it became a challenge. They had to perform serious dialogue while surrounded by controls that did nothing. Many buttons weren't connected to anything at all. Some existed purely to fill empty space. Ironically, that randomness sold the illusion. Real spacecraft cockpits are overwhelming. The Flying Winnebago exaggerated that truth until it became absurd. And in doing so, it felt strangely authentic. Number 15. Household items became space controls. Look closely, and the illusion completely breaks. Some of the ship's controls weren't fabricated at all. They were borrowed from everyday life. Common household items were repurposed into futuristic interfaces. Knobs, switches, and panels originally designed for kitchens and garages suddenly became advanced technology. No effort was made to hide their origins. This choice wasn't about saving money. It was about recognition. The joke lands hardest when the audience realizes they've seen these objects before, in their own homes. The result is subtle but powerful. Every time the camera lingers, the illusion cracks just enough to remind you this ship is a parody built on reality, not imagination. Number 14. The wings were a real engineering nightmare. Adding wings to a Winnebago sounds funny. Actually making them work was not. The RV was never designed to carry extended structures. The moment wings were attached, weight distribution became a serious problem. Stress points appeared where no engineer ever expected them to exist. Even mounting the wings safely for static shots required constant reinforcement. Movement made everything worse. Any attempt to tilt or rotate the ship risked bending the supports. Crews had to limit angles, lighting, and camera movement just to keep the structure intact. Ironically, the stiffness became part of the joke. The wings didn't look elegant. They looked bolted on. Because they were. And that visual awkwardness reinforced the idea that this ship was never meant to fly in the first place. Number 13. That radar dish was a joke on purpose. Then there's the radar dish. Oversized, exposed, completely ridiculous. In most science fiction films, antennas are sleek or hidden. Here, the dish sits proudly on top, as if daring the audience to question it. This wasn't subtle satire, it was visual shouting. The dish didn't need to function, it needed to be seen. Its exaggerated size instantly broke the illusion of advanced technology. One glance and you understood the joke. This ship wasn't futuristic, it was pretending. By exaggerating something normally serious, the filmmakers flipped expectation into comedy. The radar dish became a symbol, not of communication or navigation, but of intentional wrongness. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Number 12. The Winnebago almost fell apart on set. What audiences never saw was how close the ship came to disaster. Under studio lights and repeated takes, the Flying Winnebago began to reveal its limits. Panels loosened. Fixtures shifted. Parts designed to look solid proved anything but. The problem wasn't negligence. It was physics. A full-size RV was never meant to be mounted on rigs, tilted at angles, or held in place for long shooting days. Stress built up quietly until small failures became constant interruptions. Crew members were forced to inspect the ship between takes, tighten screws, reinforce joints. Sometimes simply hope nothing failed while the cameras were rolling. That tension never made it into the script, but it lived on set, and it gave every scene an edge. The ship wasn't just pretending to be unstable, it actually was. Number 11. Actors had no idea what half the buttons did. Inside the cockpit, confusion wasn't just visual, it was real. Many of the controls surrounding the actors had no function whatsoever. They existed to fill space, not to operate anything. This left performers improvising. When a scene called for urgency, actors pressed buttons at random, turned knobs instinctively, and hoped it looked convincing. There was no guidance, no logic, just motion. Ironically, that uncertainty improved the performances. Real pilots don't calmly analyze controls during emergencies. They react. The chaos in the cockpit forced actors to do the same. What looked like parody on screen was fueled by genuine confusion behind the scenes. And that authenticity, accidental as it was, made the comedy land harder. Number 10. It was shot like a serious sci-fi ship. Here's the paradox. Despite how ridiculous it looked, the Flying Winnebago was filmed with complete sincerity. Cameras treated it like a real spacecraft. Slow pushes, dramatic angles, careful lighting to sell scale and weight. The crew avoided exaggerated movements, letting the ship occupy the frame as if it deserved respect. This wasn't accidental. The joke only worked if the filmmaking stayed straight. If the camera laughed too, the illusion would collapse. So instead, the visuals committed fully. That seriousness created contrast. The more honestly the ship was shot, the funnier it became. Comedy didn't come from mockery, it came from restraint. And that decision elevated the Winnebago from a prop to a character. Number 9. The sound design was borrowed from other movies. The illusion didn't stop with visuals. Sound played a crucial role, and originality wasn't the priority. Instead of creating unique effects, the production reused familiar sci-fi sounds, engine hums, mechanical whirs, audio cues audiences already associated with serious space travel. This choice anchored the absurd ship in a recognizable reality. Your ears told you this was a legitimate spacecraft, even while your eyes disagreed. It was an old Hollywood trick. Borrow credibility from established films and let the contrast do the comedic work. The result was subtle but powerful. The Flying Winnebago didn't sound like a joke, and that made it impossible to ignore. Number 8. Moving the RV drew police attention. Once filming moved beyond the studio, the Winnebago caused unexpected trouble. Transporting a massive, modified RV through public roads was never going to be discreet. The ship looked wrong everywhere it went. Too strange for normal traffic, too real to be dismissed as a prop. People stared, drivers slowed down, and eventually, authorities noticed. There were moments when the crew had to explain why a heavily altered RV was being hauled like sensitive equipment. Paperwork became essential, confusion unavoidable. In the real world, the Flying Winnebago didn't read as comedy. It read as a problem. And that disconnect highlighted how thin the line was between parody and reality. Number 7. The interior was built bigger than life. Inside, reality bent again. The interior sets were not exact replicas of the RV's real dimensions. They were exaggerated. Walls were pushed back, ceilings lifted, spaces widened just enough to fit cameras, lights, and movement. The ship looked cramped on the outside, but oddly roomy within. This distortion was invisible to most viewers, but it contributed to the surreal feeling. Nothing quite lined up logically. The ship existed in two conflicting realities. That contradiction became part of its identity. The Flying Winnebago wasn't bound by physics or logic. It followed cinematic necessity, and that freedom allowed the absurd to breathe. Number 6. Practical effects came before safety. In an era before strict safety standards, practicality often came first. The Flying Winnebago was treated less like a fragile prop and more like a working object. Rigging crews pushed limits. Heavy components were lifted, angled, and suspended for the sake of the shot. Comfort and safety were secondary to making the ship look convincing on camera. Actors trusted the process. There were moments of unease, but production moved forward. If something rattled or shifted, the assumption was simple. Get the take, fix it later. That mindset defined the era. The risk wasn't dramatized, it was normalized. And it gave the ship a presence that no digital effect could replicate. Number 5. Comedy came from real engineering limits. The funniest moments weren't scripted. They emerged from what the ship physically could not do. The Winnebago couldn't move smoothly. It couldn't turn gracefully. Every limitation forced creative workarounds that leaned into awkwardness instead of hiding it. Instead of fighting reality, the filmmakers embraced it. If something looked clumsy, they framed it. If movement felt slow, they exaggerated it. The ship's failures became its personality. This is where parody became honest. The comedy didn't mock science fiction. It exposed the gap between imagination and reality. And that gap is what audiences remember. Number 4. Mel Brooks knew exactly how dumb it looked. Nothing about the Flying Winnebago was accidental. Mel Brooks knew exactly how ridiculous it looked, and that awareness shaped every creative choice. He understood that parody only works when it respects its target. So instead of making the ship cheap or lazy, he pushed the team to treat it seriously. The joke wasn't that it was poorly made. The joke was that it was made earnestly and still looked absurd. That balance required restraint. Too much exaggeration would have turned the ship into a cartoon. Too little, and the satire would vanish. Brooks walked that line carefully. His confidence allowed the design to stay bold. The Winnebago didn't apologize for existing. It committed, fully. And that commitment is what made it iconic rather than forgettable. Number 3, multiple versions of the RV existed. What most fans don't realize is that there wasn't just one Flying Winnebago. There were multiple versions, each built for a specific purpose. Some were reinforced for rigging. Others were stripped down for interior shots. A few existed solely to survive stunts or awkward angles. No single version could handle everything. This modular approach was practical, not glamorous. It allowed the crew to adapt quickly without constantly rebuilding the same vehicle, but it also created continuity challenges. Small differences slipped through. Panel placement, surface wear, minor details that changed from scene to scene. Those inconsistencies became part of the ship's history. Not flaws to be hidden, but fingerprints of a production doing whatever it took to make the impossible work. Number 2, most of the original ship was destroyed. After the cameras stopped rolling, reality returned quickly. The Flying Winnebago was never meant to last. Storage was expensive. Maintenance, pointless. The ship had served its purpose. Piece by piece, it was dismantled, parts scrapped, materials reused or discarded without ceremony. There was no grand farewell, no museum plan, no preservation effort. At the time, it was just another prop from a comedy film. Only fragments survived. Photos, stories, memories from the crew. The physical ship faded, but the image remained. And in that disappearance, something unexpected happened. The Winnebago became more powerful as an idea than it ever was as an object. Number 1, the dumbest ship became a cult icon. Years passed, and something strange happened. The Flying Winnebago refused to be forgotten. Fans remembered it, quoted it, loved it not despite its flaws, but because of them. It represented a kind of filmmaking that no longer exists. Practical, messy, honest. A time when even the dumbest idea had to be built by hand. Today, the ship lives on without needing to exist. In screenshots, in memories, in laughter shared by people who recognize it instantly. In the end, the Flying Winnebago wasn't just a joke. It was proof that commitment can turn absurdity into legend. And before we close this file for good, let's pause for a moment. If stories like this matter to you, the strange decisions, the real mistakes, the handmade chaos behind movie legends, then this is the kind of channel built for you. Feel free to subscribe and let me know which moment surprised you most. Because the final truth about the Flying Winnebago isn't technical at all. It's emotional. This ship survived without surviving. Its body was scrapped, its parts vanished, but its image stayed burned into pop culture. Why? Because it represents a time when filmmakers couldn't hide behind computers, when even a joke had to be constructed, lifted, lit, and risked in front of a camera. When absurd ideas demanded real commitment. The Flying Winnebago worked not because it was clever, but because everyone involved treated the dumbest idea imaginable with total sincerity. And that's why, decades later, people still remember it. Not as a spaceship, not as a prop, but as proof that sometimes the most ridiculous creations leave the deepest mark.